Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 253. In This Together, Men's Groups and Their Empowering Influence, my interview with Jason Lange. Well, welcome to a brand new month where we're going to be getting into the idea that we really do need each other, and how a solid support system is everything when it comes to changing, growing, and healing. Well, I think that is especially so for men, because until recently, there hasn't been the focus on them in coaching or therapy. And men have told me so many times over the years that they wish there were more places for them to go to work with other men. Well, today I'm talking to quite the pioneer, I think, in men's work. And I'm so tickled to bring you Jason Lange and our conversation about the importance of men, supporting men, and finding what it means to be a healthy guy. But first, just want to remind you, join the big group of folks that are checking out my great mini course ebook I have available on healthy boundaries. It has good information to get you started on boundary work, including a written ebook, audio podcasts, and worksheets to really get you thinking. And if you want to do a little bit more work on that, I have a 3-part masterclass, which is very affordable, which is available to you, and there's a coupon code. All you need to do is message me on social, and I'll get you that. And then I have my 12-module course, Find Your Voice, which gives you everything from online learning to group coaching and one-on-one support from me. All of that information is in the show notes, and make sure you get in there and don't miss out. It's really great to get the feedback on these courses in terms of how they're really helping people grow. And that matters so much to me. Okay, so let's get into it. So I'm so excited to introduce my next guest, Jason Lange, who is a men's embodiment coach. He's a group facilitator and what he calls an evolutionary guide, which I think is a great name. He helps men drop in and wake up to a deeper clarity in their life's purpose and relationships. He believes every man should be in a men's group for the growth and the support opportunities they provide. Jason is a certified No More Mr. Nice Guy coach and has studied with leaders such as John Wineland, Dr. Robert Glover, and others. Jason says of all of the work he's been doing for the past 20 years, men's groups have been the most impactful in changing the quality of his life day to day. And it's now a part of his mission for every man to be in a men's group so they can feel healthier in their expression in the world, create more vital, intimate partnerships, and be of service to their families and communities. This week, I talked to Jason about how men need places to go, to be with other men, to learn and grow and to heal. I can tell you from my work over the years with men individually and in groups and relationship counseling and coaching that they are really yearning for more support. And they often have father wounds that need to be healed. I think Jason has some great wisdom to bring to the table around what men need. And I encourage you to not only take in what he's saying today, but also pass this episode along to not only the men in your life, but the women too, so they can have a better understanding of what the struggles are. Because we've socialized men to not talk about them. All right, so I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. Here's Jason Lange. Well, welcome, Jason. It's really good to have you here. And I know we talked recently, and I was really excited to find you because sitting with men over the years in both counseling and in coaching environments and hearing from them all the time that there is such a need for support for men, and especially men's group environments. There just aren't enough of them. So welcome to the show. And I'd love for you to share with me How did you get into this work? Like, what is your journey? What is your story behind this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, Mary. And yeah, my journey into men's groups and men's work and facilitating them, really, it started with my own evolution in that I think I have a somewhat typical story. And, this is one of the kind of ding, 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 ding phrases I often hear from men now when they preface this with, I had a pretty good childhood. And then as we dig in, there's often more under the surface than a lot of men realize. And for me, I'm a white guy here in the United States, raised kind of lower middle class, had all my survival needs taken care of in the sense of food, shelter, security, things like that. But my particular family constellation, and obviously I didn't know this at the time, but as I matured, was deeply neglectful in terms of emotional connection and presence, which is something wasn't online in my family. There was almost no physical touch, almost no emotional touch, and that has impacted me and my siblings in all kinds of different ways. And, like with many men I work with, it's not that it's my parents' fault, but they were raised a certain way and then that got passed on. And, there's an impact to this stuff. And, you probably see it as much as anyone, but, there's a couple of generations of us that were basically raised in the Dr. Spock, let them cry it out framework, which is just totally nuts when you look back on, how kind of barbaric that is, just like leave the child alone. So I had a little bit of that. And for me, it all really started to come to a head when I became a teenager. And so was going through puberty and suddenly I started getting interested in women. And what I discovered was I was just incredibly uncomfortable in my body around women. I would get very anxious. I would get really stuck in my head. I had no idea how to connect with them, felt really uncomfortable with touch. And it started a journey for me of just being in a lot of pain from a young age around not being able to get into a relationship or have some of the experiences I was seeing some of my peers have. And that pain is what kind of kicked me into a personal growth trajectory of, okay, I was pretty young, but I was like, there's got to be something different here going on than what I'm living, because this is painful and I don't like it and I don't know what to do with it. And that led me kind of more initially into like a philosophical realm. And then eventually I got into therapy and men's work and embodiment work. And that really started to change things for me when I particularly did some therapeutic work and got in touch with just how deeply neglected a young part of me was. And suddenly the light bulbs went off of, no wonder why I'm really uncomfortable being physically close to women. It's just not an experience my body's ever had. But it was in my mid-20s that I got lucky, where I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and met some men who introduced me to men's groups and men's work. Yeah, so at a pretty young age, I got pretty lucky. In retrospect, I'm like so grateful. And that has been the modality that's really probably I've stuck with the most, that has ended up changing me the most. And so I got into a men's group when I was about 26. And then I had maybe 3 years off in my early 30s, but I've been in one since then. I'm in many at this point for various different reasons, but they all nourish me and have tremendously helped me with my growth in inner work and transformation. And, as a father, as an entrepreneur, as a husband, have helped me navigate some unbelievably challenging situations in my life, in the last couple of years. And it was maybe 8 years ago or so, I was just so deep in the work myself. I kept talking about it. People started noticing me showing up differently. I was feeling different in the world, that men started asking me like, hey, can I join your group? In just the actual physical space my personal group was meeting in here in LA could only hold like 8 people. And so we were full. But enough people asked me that at one point I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll start a group where guys can drop in and have the experience. And that kind of set the scene for my increasing, this is just what I'm throwing all my eggs into, so to speak, is supporting men and particularly creating men's groups for guys.
Wow, what a journey. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it is so telling how they came up to you because they wanted what you had. Like, wow, can I join your group? Right. And I think that is the best way for people to find what they need because it means they're ready for it. But it also really shows just how powerful your work was for you. What do you think it is about the group versus a one-on-one with a male therapist, let's say, or a male coach that creates the differences? I'm sure there's more than one.
Yeah, there's many different things here. One of which I will say, and this isn't the case for everyone, but it was true for me, is I was pretty sophisticated with my ability to kind of bullshit. And what I mean by that is I was working with a therapist and I was pretty good at like knowing how to come in and kind of share, but maybe not go quite as deep. It's very hard to explain now, but I was able to hide even from my therapist. And what I found in a group, interestingly enough, was just because, most groups I run are between 6 and 10 guys. And so suddenly you have 12, to 20 eyeballs on you. And it's almost like every man is tuning in from a slightly different lens, slightly different vibration. And it was much harder for me to trick 6 to 10 men. If I would come in, I'm doing okay, almost inevitably, at least one man would feel a little dissonance of it. Yeah, I hear you saying that. And I don't know, some part of me doesn't buy it. Like, what's really going on for you? And then it would drop me into a deeper level. So that was a big part of just I find it's much harder to hide in a group just because there's that much more consciousness on you, that much more attention on you. And then the trajectory over time is a really key thing. So not all men's groups are, long lasting, some are more short-term programs and stuff, but the groups I find the most powerful and I really recommend to men are joining something you can be in for years, if not the rest of your life. Because then there's this journey we go on in the group together of becoming more and more intimate with each other, knowing each other's stories, knowing each other's gifts, knowing each other's kryptonite, whether it comes to relationships or different things that we fall into over and over. And what I found is, men who knew me really well, and I say this in a good way, were able to push me as well in terms of, hey, you've been talking about being, you've been sharing that you're in pain around this thing for 2 years now, and you keep saying you want to change it and it's not changing. So what's going on here? And that, that's possible with a coach and a therapist too, but there's something about, again, the group dynamic that I find is so powerful. And then and I think this is particularly big for men. What I've seen is, I kind of call it, me and one of my facilitators call it the masculine vortex, but it's this kind of process of when men see and are in the presence of another man who opens up and becomes vulnerable and goes deep, it creates a type of permission. And so the more men are around with each other, the more each man steps in and shares his truth, shares his vulnerability, the more other men are suddenly willing to do it because they're like, oh, wait, that guy just shared and, and I totally trust him more after he shared that, not less, or I feel he's even more powerful. And so there's kind of like this swirl that I find happens in groups where we can just often go deeper. And then, just at a different level, I'm realizing too, so much obviously I could say here, is just community and connection. So one of the big problems I think we'll be talking about here that so many men I work with is they're just isolated and they feel lonely. And there's all kinds of reasons in our culture right now for that. But being in a group, it has fed me socially as well, where, as I have become a father and husband and business owner, my free time is very precious to me. And for something to take me away from my daughter and in my family, it has to be quality. And so what I've found and really enjoyed about men's group is every time I go, whether it's my bi-weekly group here in LA or retreats I go on, I come away from it feeling that was time well spent. And it was a really efficient use of time as well. So like I live here in LA, and seeing 8 men every other week would be almost impossible, just geographically how big the city is. I don't have time to keep up with that many men kind of in one-on-one. But twice a month, I get to go really deep with these guys. And it has, in a pretty powerful way, it actually kind of inoculated me pretty considerably against what was really hard for many men in the COVID pandemic of isolation and lockdowns. We kept meeting virtually, then we kept meeting in backyards. And so I never lost that connection. And it wasn't as great as just hanging out together and kind of being more loose and free in the non-pandemic times. But my connection needs were totally met. I was seeing my men, and it helped me survive quite a bit of intensity. So I know I just threw a lot at you there, but that's my first take.
That's great. I throw a lot out when I talk too, so I totally relate. That is wonderful. And it confirms my experience as a coach and a clinician, working individually with men, working with couples, and also working in group formats over the years. What I have found and what you're confirming is, and this is just my personal theory, but one, if a group meets a lot of the needs on Maslow's scale, safety and security, belongingness, self-esteem, all the way up to self-actualization. When I worked in treatment, the 12-step model did a really good job of that, I think, which is why I think they're still around, because then it's self-actualization, go out and help, another person who's suffering. And so when I also would meet with people individually, like you said, bullshitting the therapist, right? I was that there. I am the therapist, right? I am the coach. And then I would put these people in a men's group or a women's group. And within 6 weeks, they're just making all sorts of changes. I'm like, what the hell just happened here? Right? We're not really talking about anything different per se. It was not the material, right? I think it was, like you said, the safety of the group. You have more eyes on you, but also I think you have the family you didn't have. That's my personal theory, right? That community, I think maybe even goes deeper because, the family, there's your dinner table, so to speak, where there are people there to support you and love you no matter what and hold your feet to the fire. And then, like you said, with men need to identify and model typically after their dads, not all men, right? But heterosexual men, yeah. And so hilariously, like you said, as soon as the first man in the group opened up, it's like, there go the dominoes, right? We're no longer talking about football. We are talking, because he gave permission. I loved how you said that. Gave permission to be open and vulnerable and honest and not keep it intellectual and up in his head.
Yes. Yeah. And I see that. I've experienced that quite a bit in my own journey. And just that groups become this interesting, men's groups can become this interesting reparenting dynamic where we're getting little bits of the fatherly nutrition. A lot of even a great dad can't be the perfect dad. It's just not possible, right? We all have gifts. We all have weaknesses. But what I see in a group is oftentimes each man can step in and holds a different mysterious piece of the puzzle of, oh, wow, great, you're helping me with this, I'm helping you with that. And it becomes this beautiful exchange. But we're really, over time, refathering each other in some pretty potent ways in terms of being able to bring that energy. And then that permission piece is just so key, because so many men I work with come in and they have the experience of, I didn't even know this was possible, that this was an option where I could get real, I could talk about my feelings, I could be in my emotions. They've just been shown this other way by default of hold it all inside, which ends up, destroying a lot of men or bringing them into a place of autoimmune disorders, fatigue, depression. There's so many different things that come up when we don't have these needs met. But yeah, a good group really does create, I like how you said that on the hierarchy of needs, it can really satisfy so much of that. And they also, another thing I'll say is one of the guys in my group here in LA calls it the sunlight effect of, there's something to the momentum of a group as well. When one man has a breakthrough or makes a change in his life, it sparks oh, I want to do that too. oh, he did it. I can do it. I can have that tough conversation, or I can make that change at home. And it kind of generates like a group momentum that feels really good. Like, again, this is one of the big shifts I see in a lot of men is moving away from this idea, all men are my competition, to the right men can be my allies. And suddenly it's like, it feels so good when we get to celebrate a man who's had a big change or shift or victory. And it's like, we want to cheer him on. And then it actually gives us energy to go deal with our own stuff, in my experience of like, oh, cool. Like, and then as a group to look at the changes over time is always so inspiring.
That's so amazing. Yes. And I agree with you, because when I would work with relationships or just work with, a man one-on-one, I would see just how much the group, if he found a group, if he was lucky enough to find a group, right? Because a lot of people only find groups in churches, and that's not for everyone.
Yeah.
There are some other men's retreats they've been, lucky enough to go on. I don't think we have enough. I think it is starting to change. But you're right. I love that sunlight effect. And we know that, especially for adults, peer learning is the best, right? That's how we learn.
Yeah.
I think the quickest, but also in the most sustaining way. And you're right. A lot of reparenting is happening there. And it's the village, that they didn't have. And it's changing perceptions.
Totally. And, the types of men I tend to work with a lot, and I consider myself this, so is nice guys, as popularized by Dr. Robert Glover, who wrote the book, No More Mr. Nice Guy. So these are men who, tend to be really sweet, really sensitive, really safe, but often have a hard time advocating for themselves or setting healthy boundaries. And for many of the men I work with like that, part of what I see happening at the root is because many of them never had a strong, healthy, masculine role model that they felt safe and could relax around, they don't trust the masculine. So they actually don't trust the masculine. They don't trust other men. And when they don't trust other men or the masculine, it's very hard to trust that inside yourself as well, right? So one of the things I do often see happen is as men get into a group and they realize, wow, actually, these guys aren't here to get me or hurt me, or I can really be myself with these men, and I can start to trust the masculine around me. I see other men, those same men then start to connect with that inside themselves, and they start to trust themselves more of, okay, this part of me that can stand up for myself, speak for what I want, set healthy boundaries, that's okay. And I need that part. In fact, the more I have that online, the more I can be a very trustable presence to people around me.
That is so important, what you said about not being able to trust the masculine and not having a role model there for them, because I run into that all the time. And so it's harder for these guys because I think historically it's the men who are actually more aggressive. It's like, okay, anger management, there you go. There's your class, right? Do your 8 weeks and you're done. But these other guys go under the radar oftentimes because they are so nice and kind, and reliable in some respects, right? They go to work. I mean, their problems aren't overt enough, I think, for them to see that they are problems, but they are. And they call us, oh my goodness, God, we could talk all day about what this avoidance and nice guy routine does to a relationship. Oh boy. And that's why I love the work that you do, because it is geared more towards them. I mean, I assume you let all guys in your groups, but your specialty is.
Yeah, I work with a huge range of guys, but those guys in particular, I do work quite a bit with now. And I think because there is a bit of a hunger in that. And I see this, and you probably see this too, like there's so much talk in the culture of like toxic masculine and what not to be. But there's not a whole lot of role modeling for, well, what should you be? And most men I work with have grown up seeing what I kind of call the three basic models of masculinity. The macho jerk, the my way or the highway. I just go for what I want. I take what I want. I'm not particularly attuned to other people. In some sense, this man can sometimes be successful. He goes towards what he wants, but he's not taking care of other people along the way, let's just say. And a large part of the masculine has been that through history. And, can cause a lot of suffering. Then there was a reaction to that, which was, well, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that guy who's just hurting women or taking advantage of other people or destroying the environment. So I want to be a nice guy, right? And there's like that's like a counter reaction to that. And again, many men I talk to, they literally say, I didn't want to be my dad, or I didn't want to be like that. So I ran the other way. And oftentimes that takes them into nice guy, which is, as I put it, it's generally kind of disconnecting from self and prioritizing connection with other. And that's often what causes a lot of the harm. And then there's also the third, one that's a little rare, but I think particularly in some older generations, but even these days, is what I just kind of call the stoic. The guy who just shows up in life, gets things done, but man, is he on lockdown. His inner world is just not something he talks about or shares. There is no space for, emotions or anything like that. He's just hyper rational, doesn't ever go to feeling, keeps everything inside, kind of has a toughness about him. I sometimes say this is sometimes like more of I kind of call it the grandfatherly vet generation sometimes, where you're like, wow, I just found out my, grandfather served in World War II and he never talked about it once in his entire life, right? And there's probably quite a bit in there. But all three of those, I think, are what are failing men these days, because none of those strategies are leading to healthy, vital, happy, connected men. So part of what men's groups and this work, I think, gets to do is show men that there's another way. There's another path where we can be rooted in our power and still open and sensitive in deeply serving those around us.
Right. Those three categories, I think they're on point. You're right. And so what do they choose from? Can you keep going with that and explain, in your mind, what is healthy masculinity? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I kind of define it as three pieces, and a lot of people will talk about this in terms of head, heart, and gut or body. And so it's being fully connected to our bodies and grounded in a safe, relaxed, and present nervous system. So literally having the capacity to just be here and be directly connected to our bodily sensations, including our emotions. So what's our direct felt experience? That is a huge edge for so many men because we were never taught this. We're not really trained this in culture, but developing that interoception to know what's going on inside ourselves, to be connected to ourselves, and to just be present and not be stuck ruminating all day long, which so many men do, right? Just up in our heads. So another way to put this is embodied, right? So actually being embodied, being in our body in the moment. And it tends to be hard for men to begin with just because of some of our wiring. But you layer onto that all the cultural stuff right now and like technology, everything is wanting to get us out of our body in the moment, and pull us away from our bodies. So for me, the healthy masculine is rooted in a grounded and connected present body. That includes the part of us that is in touch with our power and our sexuality and our impulses and our desire, right? These are big things that we want to have online as men. We don't want to just throw the baby away with the bathwater, so to speak. Just because some men don't know how to control those parts of themselves, it doesn't mean being strong. It doesn't mean being sexual is bad in my mind. It's what we do with that, right? It's what we do with those energies, how we hold them responsibly. So that's kind of what I kind of call level one. Then level two, and this is the part a lot of nice guys have, is the open, sensitive heart. So being able to be connected particularly to our emotions, but also to be connected to others around us, to be able to attune to another human being. And just as we're being present with ourselves, to actually be present with them. And you probably know this as well. As I say, for men, it's often the shift from trying to fix everything to just becoming present, particularly with our spouses, but really with anyone. Can I just be here with you in your experience? So there's an openness, right? There's an actual openness. There's not just a guarded closure around everything, but there's I'm feeling you and I'm allowing you to feel me. So this sensitivity is actually quite online. And then the third component I call is just like a deep and wide awareness. So it's And this isn't so much being stuck in the head, but it's orienting to what's most important in any given moment. And this is such a rare thing, but like, where should my attention be right now? And so the healthy masculine has a context for what's the most important thing for me to be focusing on in this moment. Is it, this thing on my phone, or is it the child in front of me? Is it, this stressful thing at work, or is it my relationship on the rocks, right? Like these are really important things. And this awareness, it's one that kind of includes both of the other pieces as well. It includes our body, it includes our heart and other people, but it's having a sense of what should I be paying attention to right now and what's most important to pay attention to. And when all three of those in my mind are online, men become really powerful. And not in the sense of dominating power, but powerful in that they're able to move towards what they want and support others in doing the same. To me, that's kind of a definition of a masculine power. Can you move towards the things you want and support others in doing the same? And a man who does that, is a huge asset to his family, to his community, to his work. And there just haven't been too many role models. All right, in that sense. And again, it's why I love getting guys into groups, because like you said, when you see it, it becomes really obvious in a sense. It's like, oh, wow, that guy is, I see this all the time. That guy is in his tears and he doesn't feel weak. He feels super strong, actually. Like, I trust this man even more having seen him grieve that hard thing. Or another big one I see for men, sometimes nice guys as well, is when they first experience a man who is in contact with his anger, but isn't dangerous. So he's in touch with his anger. He's in touch with the fact that he really cares about something and he's upset about it, but he doesn't feel dangerous. He's not going to like explode. He's able to be present in that. And he's able to hold himself in that. So again, it just gets transmitted so fast, and suddenly men are like, oh, that's how I want to be. I want to be like that. And oftentimes it's when these three channels are online, the head, the heart, and the body, the guts, so to speak.
And that makes so much sense because they're not in fight or flight. They're not out of body.
Yeah.
And the other thing you spoke to is what I work with men a lot around is get out of fear and get into choice. The only thing bigger than your fear is what's more important than your fear, like what matters. And it's a lot of values and beliefs-based work. And I think, because I do a lot of empowerment work with people, boy, that's a big piece of it. And so I love the work that you're doing there, and for them to find, like you called it, an embodied way to really show up and be present in ways that they want to. And it's just so amazing to see when men start to get this, how everything changes for them. A colleague of mine, he and I have had a long-standing argument. He says, no, women run relationships. Historically, at least, Mary, they've run relationships. And I say, actually, when men change, everything changes. Now, I know that sounds patriarchal and we're giving them way too much power, but I think it also could be that women have usually read like 4 books by the time they get to the process and men haven't. So I think they're more on a page, but I love how things change, and that every time, like you said, one man does this, he makes it possible and easier for someone else to do it.
Yeah, and I would agree with you in that I do think men have a lot of power in relationship in terms of changing it, because we could do a whole episode on this, but just in terms of in the work I do, we call it polarity, of just how do masculine energy and feminine energy interact. And, there's a lot more nuance than people understand in that. Just because you're a man doesn't mean you're masculine oriented. Just because you were born in a woman's body doesn't mean you're feminine oriented. We all have access to both of these. And as human beings, we need both. But for a lot of men, they enjoy holding the masculine in relationship. And the masculine sets the culture, the pace, the direction, the vision of the relationship. And it can be really powerful. And I think a lot of women have had to hold that by default because men haven't been trained on this and don't know how to lead the conversations around emotional tension or what are we doing here, or a man doesn't know himself and the direction of his life enough, so he doesn't want to really talk about the future because he's not sure if he wants to commit. And so then it kind of falls on the woman a lot of times to be having these conversations of like, hey, we've been seeing each other like 6 months here. Like, what are we doing? Like, is this going to go any, there's so many different ways that can go. But one of the huge shifts I do see change things is men can start to become, in a weird way, the emotional leader of the relationship. So to actually be the one that sits down and is like, hey, I noticed things have been a little tense between us these last couple days. I'm wondering what's going on. Here's what's going on for me. And when men start doing that, relationships change really fast. And I've seen it with so many guys. And so many of their partners are often just grateful. They're like, oh, I don't mind leading that kind of stuff some of the time. But when all the emotional labor falls on to me by default, it gets pretty exhausting. And then, some of those women are then also raising children and running a house. Like, it's a lot of burden. And for men to take some of that on helps so much, I've seen. And even in, with men I've worked with whose partners aren't maybe as growth oriented, like they haven't really started a journey yet, what I've seen is just when a man's willing to go first and he starts putting in work to change himself and he starts showing up differently in the relationship, a lot of times their partners will be far more open to stepping into doing some work on their side of like, hey, yeah, it does feel different. And you know what? I'm realizing I might need some therapy too, or I might need a women's group, and suddenly it becomes, we're both doing our work. But the willingness of a man to go first, I think it has so much power and potential to change a relationship, and pretty fast sometimes.
Well said. Yes, she doesn't want to be his mama and she doesn't want to be the project manager anymore. She really wants a partner and a co-leader, right? She wants to do with in a very collaborative sense. Wow. And so before we go, I have one more question. What is the man box? Like, can you explain that for us? I'm so curious as to.
Yeah. So the man box is a term coined by, I meant to look this up and I totally forgot. His name is Tony something, but he was a social worker out of, I think, Oakland. And he came up with it maybe in the 90s. But it's kind of a catch-all for literally the check boxes in our culture of what a man is expected to be in order to be a man. So there's some really interesting research here, at least for those of us in the West. It may be different in other places, but they polled a bunch of men and women around what marks the transition of a girl into womanhood and what marks the transition of a boy into manhood. And it was really interesting. For better or worse, people tended to associate for women biological changes. So that, right, she comes into her womanhood, her body changes, she starts having a cycle. And when that happens, she's a woman. For men, it was not based so much on biology, but on behavior. So a man could be a grown man. Physically, he could be done maturing, but still be a boy because he hadn't stepped into his manhood in terms of taking charge of his life or taking care of his family or whatever. And so it's the kind of set of conditions for what makes a man are the man box. And some of the just really popular kind of culturally defined ones that we're all swimming in and that, people like you and I are trying to burst a little bit are men are not supposed to show emotions or vulnerability. You're supposed to be tough. You're supposed to pick yourself up by your own bootstraps. You're supposed to, this is a crazy one that impacts so many men without realizing it. Like, if sex is available to a man, he should take it. And if he doesn't, he's not a man, right? Like, there's all these crazy conditions around, what you're allowed to be as a man. So that they call that the man box because it's kind of confining. If you aren't these things, and there's some variation with them in different cultures around the world, but there's a lot of expectations that are pretty universal, then you're not a man. And so men aren't actually being true to themselves and are living inside this little tiny box. And one of the biggest ones that I find men's groups and men's work really starts to burst is you're an emotional being as a man, and it's not weak to have emotions or be vulnerable. And how I often say that is you were mentioning fear earlier on, is like, well, tell me, which man is really more afraid? The guy who is terrified of touching his emotional experience and puts on this whole bravado, or the man who just goes into it and says, I'm sad right now, I'm crying. And to me, it's the man who's afraid of feelings, right? That is actually the more fearful being. And that's one of the contexts we get to burst in the man box of saying, you know what? We get to create the rules on an individual basis for what this means. And in this day and age, it's even more dynamic than ever. Yes, there's some powerful things we can step into that I think, attributes of the healthy masculine, like I talked about, but there's no one way that has to look. Every man is going to manifest his, masculine or manhood, so to speak, in his own way. And for some guys, that might be, more soft and sensitive and artistic. Other guys, it might be more big and direct. But it's kind of becoming aware of what are the expectations I'm living by as a man that I never really even agreed to. It's just this kind of unconscious thing that I'm like trying to succeed, or, I got to make money to be successful. Or like, there's just so many different things for us guys that really trip us up. So the man box is that collection of beliefs. And it's a process for each man to actually go through and become clear. What is the box I'm allowing myself to live in right now? And do I want to? There can be such a huge shift there of, wow, why do I believe that to be true? Oh, it's because of, movies, or how I was raised in my family, or, who knows, even certain religious expectations as well. And we're here to burst that and say, you know what? No, we get to be far more creative with who we want to be in life these days. And again, that's a place where I see men's groups are really great for that, because we get to see so many different flavors of men showing up in their own ways and their own different types of power that give us like a bigger palette to, paint this picture of who we want to be.
I love that. I love that idea of them taking their power back and deciding who they want to be, despite, how they were raised or what that man box said that was, that they've been living in, that they get to choose now. And I love that it's not just a new box of masculinity we're trying to stick men in, right? Because God forbid you try to do that to women these days. I love how you're also supporting, which I always have too, that men get to feel just as empowered as they want to be, and just as we want women to be, because they're people. And so, wow. Totally. So how do men find you? And can you speak just quickly about, your groups that you offer?
Yeah. So best way to keep up with me is at my website, which is evolutionary.men. So it's not .com, it's .men. And on there, you can read a bunch more of what I'm up to, listen to my podcast, and see some of the different offerings I have. I run kind of a hybrid coaching program, men's group, just for guys around dating and relationships, in particular for men who want to be able to bring that leadership into their relating in a pretty deep way and get more embodied. That's a really powerful offering I run. I have a shadow work men's group I run twice a year, which is specifically for going into our shadow, the parts of ourselves that have never really seen the light of day, whether that's old emotional wounding or trauma or man box expectations. That is really transformative for a lot of guys. And then I lead a live retreat every Labor Day where men get to just physically be in the room with other men, doing embodiment practices, getting connected, practicing vulnerability. And that's frankly just super fun because, guys like to do stuff together and we bond pretty fast when we do that. So that's a couple of the big ways. And then pretty soon for men that don't have anything near their area, I'm launching a kind of, how to start your own men's group program, basically. So if you can't find it near you, as I say, that means you should probably start one. And this is going to be kind of a toolbox for men it doesn't have to be anything big and complicated. Even just pulling together 2 or 3 friends to go a little deeper once a month can be so transformative for guys.
Wow. That sounds wonderful. I just want to stop and thank you, not only for coming here today and being on the show, but for the very, very important and on-time work that you do for men. Because again, there's not enough out there for them. And I think you have also tapped into helping men who are Mr. Nice Guy and have been Mr. Nice Guy, and how that's hurting their life so much, and helping them become emotional leaders, I think is a game changer, not just for them, but for their families and their relationships and their kids. I mean, we didn't even talk about all that. And so I would love to have you on the show again, because there's so much more to talk about here. But thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for the work that you do. And
yeah, my pleasure.
Everything will be in the show notes, guys, where you can reach him and connect and look into these men's groups. Or if you have a man in your life that you think would be interested, you can pass that along.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for supporting men.
Thank you. Well, I am so grateful to have been able to have Jason on the show today. And I was just so humbled by the wisdom he brings to working with men. I think what he's been learning over the years, from his own work to his experience working with men, is invaluable and so needed today. I think this is just the first of many conversations I would like to have with him, because I think it's really important that what he's learning gets out there to help more people. So make sure you check out his own podcast, Evolutionary Men, and the great group and retreat offerings he has. The link to all his stuff is in the show notes. So today we talked to men's coach Jason Lange and explored the concepts of the historical constructs that men have felt they needed to uphold, which, he talks about, which has pigeonholed them into various types of masculinity. Jason spoke about the importance of redefining what's really healthy for men, so they can feel grounded and whole, so they can find places to support each other. We discussed just how powerful men can be in a good way in relationships, and just how much richer their lives can be. Thank you, Jason, for the important work you do for men, and for everyone really, by helping men find a safe place to grow and find healing and a healthy self-concept. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you walked away with some valuable information. I'm sure you did. Make sure you check out Jason's work. And again, pass this along to others who can benefit. If you don't get the newsletter, because there's lots of great stuff in there, including some more teachings from Jason, go to ownitpowercast.com or message me to sign up. All right. Pay it forward. Keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.